So, welcome to the podcast of the YouTube. The question we're going to answer today is this, and I know this is going to be a touchy one, but it's going to be so good. Which one is a better mom? A rich mom or a poor mom? And I'm not talking about comparing and looking outside and going that rich mom or that poor mom. I'm talking about the rich you or the poor you. Which one is a better mom? Welcome, guys, to this episode. I'm Dr. Latifat. I'm a physician, I'm a mom, and I'm also the founder of MoneyFit MD, which is a platform that's committed to helping women physicians get good at money so that we can curate the rich life that we want. And that way we can have the time freedom to create all the impact that we want to create. This episode is one that needed to happen. And you're going to hear things that's going to maybe touch you in places that you didn't even know. And I really hope that this episode frees you to do the thing that you're called to do. Okay? I have so many physicians. I've coached hundreds, if not thousands, of physicians through different platforms. And I have physicians that tell me things like, I want to have money so that I can be the kind of mom that I'm called to be. Okay? And I have people that maybe subconsciously you don't actually know that they may be jeopardizing themselves and keeping themselves stuck and relatively broke. If you've been on my platform, I define broke differently than most people. I define broke as a relative term. Broke is you under capacity of what you should be. So, for example, if your net worth is $100,000, that may be broke because maybe you have the capacity to be a millionaire. And maybe your net worth is $2 million, but your capacity is $10 million. $2 million is broke compared to where you want to be or where your capacity is. So it's a relative term, right? And what I've found is that there are times when we make excuses about what we want to do or not do, and we use our kids as the reason. This is going to be a little bit of a vulnerable episode as well, because I want to share my own experience with you guys. Some of you guys know that I did not know anything about money until literally 7 to 8 years ago. I was a physician. I went through med school, residency, fellowship, and all that stuff. And my entire goal was to just be an amazing doctor. It really wasn't until the end of my fellowship that I kind of had this look into my future. And I realized that if I did not change anything, if I kept on ignoring my finances, if I kept on believing that it was going to be okay without taking action to make it actually okay, that I was going to end up burned out in medicine. And one of my least favorite emotions is regret. Regret is one of my least favorite emotions. I experience regret, and I don't believe that I don't believe we're going to live a life of no regret. But we get to choose what we want to regret, right? What we say yes to. Would I regret what I say yes to, or will I regret the opportunity cost that I'm leaving behind? And for me, one of the things that I did not want to regret was there's so many people that had sacrificed in order for me to be where I was as a physician, that the thought of them regretting their sacrifice was not one that I wanted to experience. I went 5 years at some point without seeing my mother. I remember the day she put us on an airplane, we left Nigeria. That's a huge sacrifice, right? And to have her go through that and end up in burnout, end up hating my life and not having a choice was not one that I wanted to choose. The other thing is I had 2 kids at that point. Now we have 3 kids. And for me, I looked at my kids and I spent so much time apologizing to them when I was in training for the choices that I didn't have. So, for example, my oldest started daycare when she was 3 months, tiny 3 months. I'm thankful that I found a good daycare, but that was still really, really tiny. If I could do things differently, I would not want her to, but I literally had no choice. I was starting fellowship across the country, right? And so at that point, when I was done with training, I knew that I did not want to live a life of apologizing to my kids. And that did not mean quitting medicine or not quitting medicine. What that meant was if I'm going to go to the hospital on call, I don't want it to be because, sorry, I don't have a choice. And I was able to accomplish that really, really quickly, so that even as a GI doctor that was taking call, I did not apologize. I was like, child, I'm going to save lives. If I'm going to the hospital, it's Mommy, good luck. Thanks for helping patients because I get to do it. Not that I had to do it, I got to do it. Right? So that was the fuel that actually inspired me to start looking at my finances and stop avoiding and stop letting fear and shame and guilt keep me away from doing my finances, right? So for me, my kids were my inspiration. And that may be for you too. Or maybe you listen to this and you don't have kids. That's okay. The bottom line is there's going to have to be something that compels us to go towards the goal that we want to have. Okay? The thing though is this, in my opinion, so in this episode, I'm going to be talking about three things that I believe is the societal fault and why we're having to make this choice subconsciously and consciously about whether me with less is a better mom or me with more is a better mom. I mean, I remember this moment, even when I came to starting Money Fit MD, I remember this moment where my husband and I went to a conference. We're at a conference, and I think it was in Texas. It was hanging out, enjoying like his room service life. I was at the conference. No, sometimes we go to conferences together. It's a nice break. If it's his conference, I get to chill and vice versa. So it's a nice way to, just like enjoy the hotel and all that good stuff. But on this very particular one, I've been thinking about doing Money Fit MD, and I was so afraid. I was so resistant. And what I did not realize was that there was a part of me, a very subconscious part, that associated success with being a bad mom. I cannot be successful and be a good mom, right? So essentially, without even knowing it, I was limiting myself from the work that I'm meant to do. And whatever success was going to come from Money Fit MD, I was playing small because I was afraid that being successful was not compatible with being a good mom. And where did that story come from? A lot of the stories come from our society, right? From the things that we've seen, the movies that we're watching, without even knowing it, they're like subconsciously like planting things into our minds that we don't even know about. Right? You see that woman that becomes successful and suddenly she never sees her kid, her relationship breaks up, and all this other stuff, right? I mean, honestly, I even remember a couple of years ago talking to good friends of mine who are physicians, so, super successful. And I was like, how do you navigate your relationship and success? Because again, there's still that story that success actually can impact your ability to have a good relationship and also mother your kids. Right? And so without even knowing it, many of us are holding ourselves back and choosing to be relatively poor compared to the relative richness that we could be in the world. And so I want to talk about like the three things that society has done and almost like the three emotions that can be a factor in this. And number one is this. A lot of times when you hear success stories, you rarely hear about the rich mom that helped them be successful. We talk a lot about the relatively broke mom who sacrificed everything, who was a single mom, who did not know where the next paycheck is coming from. And we see this in Hollywood stories, but we see this even in like the media, right? Because the media likes to sell what sells, and we all like a good redemption story. We want to hear the story of the girl that looked like they were not going to make it. Like that's the real part of the Hollywood story. The person that looked like they were not going to make it and then they did, and it feels good. We love to celebrate that. But I just want to challenge us and say, like, there is a story that may be implanting in us where it's like, well, I want to know that I did a good job. And maybe if I'm rich, maybe if I'm like very successful, the value of the work that I'm doing is not going to feel like sacrifice, and so it's not going to be celebrated. A lot of this is not conscious, guys. It's subconscious because nobody in their right mind is going to get up and say that. But those things are usually beneath the surface and affects us negatively when it comes to the things that we want to create, right? And so just be aware that society and the part that society may be playing in this regard is one that if you don't recognize, if you're not aware of the story you're telling yourself, you're not going to be able to uncover the story. And if you don't uncover the story, you're going to keep wondering why things are not happening, why you're not creating the results that you want. When the real issue is the story that we're told, that if we're not grinding, if we're not hustling, it is not a sacrifice. right? It's like we want to go like, I worked so hard, I did 100 hours, and I finally did this. And it's like the only thing that's happening is you're tired. You're tired. You are tired. That's the only thing that's happening. Number two is the guilt. Talk about the guilt, right? So many women come to me and they feel guilty that on one hand, they're like, I feel guilty that as a physician, I'm not seeing my kids as much as I would like to see my kids, right? And what ends up happening in those is that can actually lead to more emotional spending, because you're spending from guilt, right? The kid is like, I want this. You're like, well, if I'm not going to be there, I should at least buy them everything that they want. And now that guilt is actually leading to you like raising a bunch of like spoiled kids because you're taking actions. You're raising them from a place of guilt, not from a place of like what's the best in the best interest of this child that I want to be independent thinker, to be a clear thinker, to be a value-based spender, value-based user that's not a hoarder, that understands the value of hard work and grit. And even if they do have privilege, they still understand that this takes work to create. But the guilt that we sometimes have by not being as available as, say, the random Susie down the street that you have this idealistic mindset about, that, oh, that Susie is a stay-at-home mom. She sees our kids all day. And maybe the neighborhood moms judge you. And maybe you're actually the one judging yourself and thinking they're judging you. Like, oh, yeah, they're like, oh, you're not going to be able to make it, right? Because you're never here. I mean, this happens. We're not making this up. This happens. And the part of it is I want you to know that you're not paranoid. Like, you're not making ish up. It actually does happen. Right? And so just keep that in mind, that may be affecting. And then when it comes to now like acquiring new skill sets, so maybe for you, like, well, I want to learn real estate. Oh, but I want to sign up for your community. I want to learn how to think differently about money, how to be savvy. But the idea of taking time away, I already feel guilty. And now I'm going to feel even more guilty because I'm already taking the time away. And so that guilt is actually preventing you from acquiring the things you want to acquire, from building, from growing. So now you're living in like that hustle grind, overspending, but nothing is changing because you have guilt. And then there's the other side, which you may be someone that like maybe you grew up in a family where there wasn't a lot and now you happen to have. And now there's the guilt of like, why am I the one that has? In fact, one of my first clients, this was the case with her. She grew up in a really affluent family where they would say things like, oh, your clinical work, she's not a GI doctor, don't worry, your doctor income is cute, right? And so for her, she had a lot of guilt as well about this money that she had access to, because she's like, why me? Like, why me? Why am I the one that has access to this money? And, with that comes the responsibilities of, I need to teach my kids how to be good, good, whatever, conduits of this money that our family owns, so that we don't lose it, right? So that it doesn't fall off in our own generation. And there's data that shows that most families, when it comes to generational wealth actually gets lost after the second generation. If you're not teaching your kids the way that you earned it, the grit, the challenge, the hard work that it took for you to get it, if you're not teaching your kids that, there's a chance that they may lose it. So there is that other guilt of like, who am I when there are people in the world that are hungry, right? Again, you can see how that can now lead to you like restricting things from your kids that you should not be restricting from them, or being hyper vigilant and not having the clarity of mind to actually help them learn, just because you have the guilt, which again, the opposite of the other one, but still guilt. And a lot of this, to be honest with you, society can turn on the volume, right? Because there is the people pleasing that we do as women physicians, as women in general. We're more likely to people please. We want people to be happy with us. But I also understand that part of it is also like our own sense of self-responsibility, where we just want to do a good job. So this is not all just like society only, but it's also us setting ourselves up for a higher standard. But I want you to understand how that actually affects your ability to perform as a parent. So again, whether it's one side, whether you're like, you don't have the time, or you actually don't even have the money, where you're like, oh man, my kids would have better opportunities if I had the money, versus the other person that may have resources but also having guilt as well. And shame plays into this a lot as well, right? I have physicians that are like, I live in the Bay Area and I'm like low income relative to all the tech gurus that are there. And our kids are the ones that are on financial aid and scholarships because all those other kids, their parents got like all the stocks and money and all those other things, right? And so there can definitely be shame that we experience. From so many factors, from spending, not spending, from time, not having time. And what I just want to impact on you today is that maybe we need to just unsubscribe from all this. Maybe we need to unsubscribe from the negative impact that these emotions can have when it comes to how we show up as moms. And maybe it's not as straightforward that whether you're rich versus whether you're poor is, I mean, I'm talking about your version, like the relative brokety part versus your relatively rich part. Maybe it's not all those. Maybe money is not actually what defines whether you're a good mom or a bad mom. Maybe it's just you that needs to decide that I am a good mom because I choose to think with clarity and I don't let my emotions about the things that I just talked about direct the time of the day for me. Because at the end of the day, what matters most is that I'm raising kids that are competent, that understands grit, that understand value based, that are not scarcity based, but also understand the responsibilities that they have with the little or the lot that they have. I was listening to an interview recently where someone was talking about this, where, you know, they said they were having conversations with this kid, or not kid, this adult that grew up in like super wealthy, private jets all the time kind of family. And this person is really grounded and said, well, it's because my parents just raised us to value things, to value people, to understand that the money is not our identity, but these are all tools. So whether you have or not, maybe these are all just tools and not something through which we need to judge ourselves about whether I'm better or not. Maybe you just are good. That's number one. And then number two, which I kind of like alluded to a little bit, is that maybe your economic resources don't determine how good you are. Because Latifah that lacked, so the Latifah that did not lack was still spending the quality of time, right? Because at the end of the day, it's quality is so much more important than just the quantity. Yes, I want you to have the quantity as well. That's why I talk about financial liberation. That's why I talk about investing and all those other things that I talk about. However, maybe it's possible that that's just one piece of the puzzle. And it doesn't have to be the driving thing, right? It doesn't have to be the thing that helps you decide how you're spending the rest of your time, or the rest of the time of your life, and how you're showing up as your kid. I'm grateful that I grew up in a two-parent household. We were comfortable. It wasn't like we were like super rich or anything, but we had roof, we have food, right? And I have family members that maybe their economics was more, maybe they had more, they had less. And you just saw that at the end of the day, what impacted how the kids showed up and what the kids showed up as wasn't just the absolute of what their parents had. It was more of like how the values that their parents pushed and taught them, right? And for me, that's why, and honestly, that's why we've decided to live our own uncommon life, because we truly do want the time to be able to impact the knowledge that we have, and to be able to like live by showing our kids the things that we value. So for example, our kids were in public school, now they're in private school. Was I a better mom when they were public or better when they were private? None. However, I will tell you what, our kids have had some issues with like racial issues when in school. Racism is just like annoying, and kids can be jerks. And what I will say is the freedom of time has allowed me to show up and be able to advocate for them, and been able to like have meetings with the teachers to be able to figure out how to help our kids succeed so that they don't have all this trauma, right? And for me, that's been one of the biggest advantage of not only like just the money part, but the time part, which is why I always remind people that time is the most important thing. Time is what you need. And even if it's not just you, but like creating that community around your kid where you guys can now leverage time. So if you have 2 hours a week, maybe there's a grandparent or a substitute parent. Like, it takes a village. So at the end of the day, my point is this: which one is better, a relatively poor mom or a relatively rich one? Neither. Both. Maybe you're just a good mom. Maybe you're just a good mom. Maybe you don't have to prove anything, actually. Maybe you don't have to prove anything, because if you listen to this podcast, you're probably a decent human being. And like I always say, guys, money doesn't change you in a negative way. Money just helps you reflect back to yourself who you truly are. And so, if you are someone that needs to work on certain things when it comes to your how you show up as a mom, that would be irrespective or regardless of money. And you get to do that. That's been one of the biggest gifts that I've given myself. My identity has nothing to do with what I have or what I lack. My identity is based on who I am as a child of God, as someone that's imperfect, that's going to mother wrong, that's going to mother right, that's going to learn from her mistakes, that's going to grow forward, that's going to be an imperfect example for her kids, that's going to teach our kids value-based spending, value-based growth, principles that last generations. That's our goal. Um, that's my goal. Time gives me the ability to do that. It's not just the money, whether it's like when I was, broke or not broke. It's more of how I decide. But either one doesn't make me a better mom. It's just a question of like what my intentions are and how I want to show up in this world. So I hope this episode has been helpful for you. If it has been, I'd love to hear. Leave us a review on the podcast. And also just type in the chat box if you're watching on the YouTube right now. I really want to hear what your thoughts are. And if you're a mom, I just want you to declare and say, I'm a good mom. Just type it. I am a good mom. I am a good mom. Because whether you're good or bad has nothing to do with your socioeconomics. The kids were given to you for a reason. You are the exact mom that they need. I love you. I appreciate you. And I'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.